As you can tell, we have to do Miketz too. There's so much, but I'm slowly catching up, even though we are almost at the very end of Genesis. So, okay, last week we ended with the exaltation of Joseph to the viceroy of Egypt, foreshadowing the ultimate exaltation of Messiah, to whom every knee must bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. Genesis 41, 45, and 46. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asnath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Verse 50. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asnath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Genesis 46:20. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. 3 times she's mentioned. And here we come across another issue in the Joseph story the rabbis were and are not comfortable with. But from the beginning to the end 46 is the genealogy of the list of the people going to Egypt and being in Egypt. She is still called Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So the Hebrew Joseph, and they of course would call him Jew, marrying the daughter of a pagan priest doesn't sit well with them. So they try to fix the problem. But the real problem is what? Trying to fix a problem that the real authors didn't even have. A problem that didn't exist. Okay? And here I always have to remember and bring it up again and again and again, Mike Heiser, when he said, let the Bible say what it says without criticizing or without making any moral judgments. Just try to understand the original context. And then wrestle with the text. Next, I have from the Torah.com, because this is really an issue, on Asenath. And there it says, as a daughter of an Egyptian priest, Asenath would have worshipped Egyptian deities, not Joseph's gods. And I pointed this problem out last week, because we said when people marry outside of their tribe or outside of their clan, the woman would always accept and worship the gods of her husband. Okay, so that was no problem. But Joseph is in Egypt, in the domain of other gods, and he's marrying the daughter of a priest. So what is Joseph doing? Okay, is he doing anything? Okay, that's the problem. Later Jewish writers, and that's the emphasis, unlike the biblical author, were troubled by this, meaning the biblical authors just state this as a fact. They are not troubled at all because it was no problem. Okay? So later Jewish writers, unlike the biblical authors, were troubled by this, as the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, 2 future tribes of Israel, Asenath and her allegiance needed clarification. Okay, and you always know what they do when they have to clarify something, right? They make things really complicated. Same thing, and the one thing that you need to remember here by the rabbis having to clarify everything and fixing problems that are not there, remember that it says Judah went down and married a Canaanite, and they made it, to fix the problem, they made it the daughter of a merchant. Okay? So that is the one that you hang this on. Okay? So they had to fix that. Okay. Asenath is the daughter of Dinah. Have you ever heard that? Targum Pseudo Jonathan, around 7th century, so that's thousands of years later, solves this problem that doesn't exist by presenting Asenat as the daughter of Joseph's sister Dinah. And he gave him Asenat, whom Dinah had born to Shechem, and the wife of Potiphera, the prince of Tanis, had brought up to be his wife. Extending this exegetical tradition, Midrash Agadah, 12th century, even later, fills in the details about how Asenat reached Egypt, because that's the problem. How did she get from here to there? How she reached Egypt and is adopted into Potiphar's house. Quote, but wasn't she Dinah's daughter? Yes, she was. We have heard that when Jacob, our father, came from Shechem, he wrote out on a golden plate everything that happened to them with Shechem and the son of Hamor. When Dinah gave birth to Asenat, he put the plate on her neck and set her down by the wall of Egypt. Okay, now you need to have your map in your mind. Okay, Shechem and the wall of Egypt. Okay? But another aspect, before I forget to mention, is for all of this to work, Jewish identity has to be matrilineal. Okay? Which biblically it is not. Okay, here we go. So, matrilineal is way later. Now your mama has to be Jewish for you to be Jewish. Okay? So stay with me. So for this to work, Jewish identity has to be matrilineal. Because if Asenat had a baby, which nowhere does it say that, because Shechem was a Hivite, one of the Canaanite tribes. Okay? By making it matrilineal, that doesn't matter. You with me? Okay. You know how the twisting and turning goes here to make it fit? So, that day, Potiphar went out for a stroll with his lads, and as they got to the wall, they heard the sound of a crying newborn. He said to his lads, bring me the child. He saw the plate and the incidents described upon it. Potiphar said to his slaves, this girl is the daughter of important people. Bring her to my house and get a nurse. And since he brought her up, she is referred to as his daughter. So we start off with the question, wasn't she Dinah's daughter? And then we end up, since he brought her up in Egypt, she's referred to as his daughter. Problem solved. Okay? So if you've never heard about Joseph and Asenat, the problem, there is another Greek version, much earlier from, I think, 1st century BC or 1st century AD, which is called Joseph and Asenat. So you can go online, find all kinds of things about this. But, of course, it all deviates from the biblical story of Joseph, of course, because there was no problem. The way the writer wrote it, there was no problem. Okay? Are you with me? Good. I don't want to lose you. Okay. So, back to the story. Joseph's renaming and his marriage into a priestly family gave him a new identity as an Egyptian noble so that he would be accepted by the people. Genesis 41, next, 45. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout the land of Egypt. So apparently that is emphasized, okay? Because it appears twice in, 2 verses. So now Tzavnat Paneach, the viceroy, the right hand of Pharaoh is set and ready to be introduced to all Egypt. Egypt, we know, they all have to bow their knees as he inspects the land and implements his plan of salvation, which will guarantee their survival during the coming famine. 41:55. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all Egypt, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do. So at this point in the narrative, nothing goes without Joseph. It's Joseph, go to Joseph, or die. Because Joseph has literally the bread of life. And I'm choosing my words wisely, okay? When the famine had reached Canaan, the stage is set for the brothers to come to Egypt. 42, verse 5. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. This verse is important because here the sons of Jacob are called the sons of Israel for the first time. That's important because we have Israel and we have Egypt. Okay? The key phrase then which characterizes the first meeting of Joseph and his 10 brothers, their first coming, is Genesis 42, verse 8. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Why? You all know the song. He walked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. He looked like an Egyptian, so he must be an Egyptian. Then in chapter 42, Joseph and his brothers meet again. This is their second coming. Though this time in radically different and in fact reversed roles from the ones in which we last saw them together in chapter 37. This is the first chapter of the Joseph cycle. Now, just as Joseph had dreamed, it is they who are the subordinates, and moreover, he is the one who is in full control of the situation. Joseph reenacts his brother's mistreatment of him, which was a severe case of, what's the word? Sinat chinam. Sinat chinam? Good, Aliyah. You may sit down. Okay. Sinat chinam, baseless hatred among the brothers. Only with them now as the victims. But on Joseph's part, we have a dose of mercy, which they did not show in their treatment towards him. Joseph needed to know if his brothers had really changed. For that, he had to present them with a very similar situation where they had miserably failed in the past and give them the opportunity to correct and prove that they had really changed and become the honest men they claimed to be in chapter 42. Next. Do I have? Okay. What's the word? Midah kineged midah. That's an expression that you need to know because it appears so often. Measure for measure. So what does Joseph do? He puts his brothers through a series of very painful trials. Measure for measure, retributive, justive, you reap what you sow, what goes around comes around, and so on. And I'm just giving you a couple of examples. Genesis 37:24, and they, the brothers, took him, Joseph, and cast him into the pit. And the word for pit is bor. That's a very important word. Jewish tradition says that Joseph was in the pit for 3 days. So what did Joseph do? Genesis 42:17. So he, Joseph, put them together in the prison for 3 days. Okay, 3 days. In the pit for 3 days. What is that? 3 days is what happens after 3 days? Resurrection. Yes. Good. Good. That's the resurrection motif. Okay? Things, numbers, names, places are there for a reason. And if you're still not catching up, you need to go through a Torah cycle again and again, and then one more time. Okay? Because I'm going to repeat this and ask you until you get it. Because that's how you get something out of your Bible. Okay? Okay. Jewish tradition in the book of Yashar 41:25 says that it was Shimon. Shimon means, listen, he listens, hears, okay, who suggested killing Joseph and throwing him in the pit. So what did Joseph do? Genesis 42:24, and he took away Shimon, from them and bound or imprisoned him before their eyes. Shimon, he was the one, apparently, who did not hear or want to hear Joseph's cries for mercy from the pit. And then we have a nugget that connects to the Brit. What was the name of Yeshua's first Messiah? What did I say? Disciple. Did I say bicycle or something? What did I say? Shimon. Simon. Okay. The one who would listen to Yeshua. Okay. So some quick examples from earlier in the narrative. Jacob deceived his father with the skins of a goat, pretending to be Esau. Later, Jacob was deceived by his own sons with the blood of a goat, pretending it was the blood of Joseph. Jacob deceived Esau. Laban deceived Jacob. Judah suggested the sale of Joseph, which caused pain and suffering to his father for over 20 years. Later, Judah, as a father himself, had to experience the pain and suffering of losing 2 sons. Okay. By the way, there are lots of parallels, I didn't cover that, between the Joseph-Esau story and the Joseph and his brothers story. In the process of testing, 2 major things happen. The brothers, for the first time, openly admit their guilt, not knowing that the man was able to understand what they were saying. 42 verse 21. Then they said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us." This is where they get the Simeon. "And we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us." They realize now that it is God who is dealing with them. Verse 28, what is this that God has done to us? And 44:16, God has found out the iniquity of our servants. Well, to that I would say, God knew that 20 years ago. So they had plenty of time. After the shock of being seated in the correct birth order, the brothers pass the next test. When Joseph puts them through the painful preferential treatment of Benjamin, their father's favorite son, by his favorite wife, Rachel, and now even highly favored in front of them all by the eccentric Egyptian ruler, for absolutely no apparent reason that they could think of. He receives 5 times the amount of food without any explanation why. And of course, in the presence of the viceroy of Egypt, nobody would dare to open their mouth and ask why. They absolutely can't figure out the man. Genesis 43:34. Then he took servants to them from before him, but Benjamin's servants was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. Young's literal says, they drank abundantly with him. So, meaning they got drunk. They probably got to the point where they said, what the hell? Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay? Then comes the goblet test. This time, Joseph specifically targets Jacob's favorite son, Benjamin, who was absent in the prior episode with Simeon. At that time, since Jacob believed that Joseph was dead, Benjamin had become Jacob's firstborn, his favorite son by his beloved wife Rachel. Benjamin had become Joseph's stand-in. Benjamin literally becomes the son of his right hand, the son at the right hand of his father, which of course is a major messianic title, messianic shadow. Joseph needs to find out one more thing. Have the brothers really changed? Have they overcome in their hearts their jealousy, even hatred of Rachel's children? Or will the older 10 brothers abandon Benjamin as well when his presence becomes inconvenient, as it is now, and the opportunity arises just as they abandoned Joseph? Have they really changed? Has there really been a moral transformation? For more than 2 decades, Joseph's brothers probably lived in a state of anguish and remorse. They bore the guilt for their brother's exile or death and their father's suffering. How did they cope with the guilt? Torah is silent. Now everything seems totally out of kilter. Somehow the Egyptian governor's cup had been found in their midst. So far as they knew, Benjamin was guilty, and they would have to leave him behind in Egypt, which they knew would break their father's heart and bring him down to the grave. What they were experiencing at that moment didn't make any sense whatsoever. It must have seemed that God had utterly abandoned them. With all apparently lost, and Benjamin about to enter into slavery, and as a result of their father's certain death, Judah once again assumes the lead role. Having devised the plan to sell Joseph into slavery, he now offers to accept slavery upon himself and his brothers. So here's a reversal, rather than abandon Benjamin. By means of these tests, Joseph ultimately forces his older brothers to face and moreover to accept the special place that Benjamin, the son of the right hand, Joseph's alter ego, has in his father's heart. And this is where Parashat Vayigash begins, where Judah steps up to face Safnat Paneach, the viceroy of Egypt. Are we back on again or not? Genesis 44:18. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Then Judah came near, and the verb nagash. Judah's passionate plea for the life of his brother Benjamin, for the sake of his father. And the word father is mentioned 14 times in this short passage. Judah offers his life for Benjamin's life. He essentially stands as Benjamin's substitute and begs Joseph to take him instead of Benjamin. Judah, the brother responsible for selling Joseph into slavery, now freely offers himself as a slave to Joseph in order to liberate Benjamin and save his father Jacob's life. Things have come full circle, and the long-standing and nearly fatal rift in the family is about to be healed. And now, finally, at long last, Joseph reveals himself. 45, verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near, Nagash." So they came near, Nagash, and then he said, "I'm Joseph, your brother, Ani Yosef Achichem, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." So Nagash, the coming near, the mending, the what was separate, the bringing the two together again. So we see this in the repeating of Nagash. That's the idea. Genesis 45, 21 and 22. And Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. This is one of those head scratchers. This is one last blatant show of preferential treatment of his brother Rachel's son. And this one is a right into your face one. Benjamin gets the silver because he was not involved in the sale of Joseph. Okay, we can justify this. But then the question is, why so much? Joseph giving Benjamin extra clothing is reminiscent of Jacob giving Joseph his special garment, which sets the whole debacle in motion. The story begins with a garment and therefore ends with garments, one final test, and they would have made the connection for sure. Okay. Last year, for the first time, I forgot something concerning verse 4. This is important. Joseph reveals himself, yet not without mentioning the crime they committed against him. And of course, against their father. But there was one more test they had to pass. And this one usually goes unnoticed. And I didn't pay too much attention to this either because I couldn't figure it out. And whenever that is the case, I just put it on the shelf and let it sit. Okay, so here comes the final test. That's what I just read, verse 21. So he gave him 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. Okay, now let's get back. So last year, this bothered me, and I actually looked at the numbers just for fun. And I found several things. In Judaism, the number 5 is associated with the concept of redemption, as seen in the Pesach Seder with the 5th cup of wine, known as the cup of Elijah, which signifies the promise of redemption. In Christianity, the number 5 is associated with grace, mercy, favor towards humanity. Okay. In Christianity, the number 300 holds several symbolic meanings and is associated with various biblical contexts. For example, the context of divine deliverance and victory. The number 300 is often linked to divine deliverance, victory, especially in military contexts. And for example, they always quote, Gideon's army of 300 defeated a much larger Midianite army, demonstrating God's power and faithfulness. Okay. In Judaism, the number 300 can be seen as a symbol of God's presence and action in the world and his divine intervention for the same reason, and they also quote the Gideon passage. The brothers sold Joseph for how much? 20 pieces of silver, and it was Judah who said, let's sell him. Next, Kliaka, which is a commentary from the 16th century, says, Joseph had secretly put their money in their sacks to provide atonement, measure for measure, for those who had sold him. And here's how they get to this interpretation from the numbers. The first time when 10 brothers come to Egypt, Joseph imprisons Simeon, and he has their silver placed back into their 9 sacks. The second time, when they return with Benjamin, Joseph releases Simeon, and he has their silver placed back in their 11 sacks. The total number of portions of silver returned is 20, corresponding to the price that was paid for Joseph. That's their interpretation. Okay. So once I had that, then there was something else floating in my head. Well, not this year, last year. Yeshua, salvation, was sold for how much? 30. Yeah, that's where the inflation comes in between the time of Joseph and the time of Yeshua. Of course. Let's be real, okay? 30 pieces of silver. By who? Judas, Yehuda, Judah. Okay. Benjamin, the son of the right hand, the innocent one not involved in the sale of Joseph, receives 300 pieces of silver. So he now has the fullness of redemption and God's grace and mercy in his hands. $30 times 10 is 300. So 30 would be what of 300? A tithe, a representation of the whole, which is all humanity. Okay. I have no idea if any of that is right. That was just no idea. Okay. Giving the brothers a change of clothing would be fitting, first of all, to the reversal of Joseph's fate and his new status. So as the viceroy of Egypt, it would only be appropriate for his family members to wear better clothes too. Okay, this is a very simple explanation for that. Genesis 45:24. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed, and he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. Commentators very often interpret this verse as Joseph's attempt to prevent his brothers from accusing each other about the past, particularly regarding the sale of Joseph. That they suggest that Joseph was concerned his brothers might blame each other for their actions and fall into conflict during their journey. So all of this is true. The brothers have a long journey in front of them and plenty of time to think and to talk and to point fingers and to get at each other's throats. But I would suggest that there is a far more profound lesson the brothers still had to learn. Number one, Joseph was privileged by his father, period, and by the Egyptians, period. Benjamin was privileged by their brother Joseph, period. They had to learn to accept and live with these facts. They had to learn to live with this tension of not knowing or understanding why. And I think that Joseph was also signaling to them that they should not even try to figure out why. Like, just accept it. That's the way it is, period. So now I want to give you some more facts about Benjamin, because he is usually not talked about, but he is very important. Benjamin, the son of the right hand. Some facts, just facts. He was the youngest of the 12 sons of Jacob. Everybody knows that. He was the second and last son of his favorite wife, Rachel. And his was the only birth of a son that caused the death of the mother. And there is symbolism in that too. He was the only full brother of Joseph. He was the only one born in the land of Canaan. And here it comes. That makes him the only son of Israel, because that was after the name change, after Jacob received the additional name Israel. Okay, now listen what I'm saying. The son of the right hand is the only son of Israel. Now take that and go home. Okay. He's the only one who had a name change at birth. And of course, this is the big Jewish thing. He was the only one not involved in the sale of Joseph. Okay. Most likely, Benjamin never knew anything about the sale of his brother, just like his father. But the narrative uses Benjamin to bring their hidden guilt into the light. By divine providence, we have two separate camps, the camp of Egypt, the camp of Canaan. And these two camps are kept apart for over 20 long years. We have Egypt, we have Joseph and his Egyptian family and the Egyptians. And in Canaan, we have Jacob and his sons. These two camps, let's say, develop or mature independently and very differently. There is no contact, no connection between the two for over 20 years. The Egyptians, representing the Gentiles or the nations, have put their trust in and have totally submitted to the authority of, and in the end, given their lives to the new viceroy. The Egyptians know nothing about Joseph, his brothers, his father, his family, his upbringing, but they know Tzafnat Paneah, the second in command, the right hand of Pharaoh. They know the one who had a plan of salvation for them. In the same way, the brothers know nothing about Tzafnat Paneah, who he is, but they know and have to painfully experience that he definitely is in charge of everything. Where have we heard about the dividing of the camp before? Yes. In seed form, the dividing of the camp of Jacob before his encounter with his brother Esau, after 20 years, 20 plus years. So we have the camp of Leah, the camp of Rachel, we have the Jews, and we have the Joes. Benjamin plays a pivotal role in the Joseph narrative, and this is important. As far as the salvation from starvation is concerned, nothing goes without Joseph. As far as the reconciliation between the brothers and the reunification of the family of Jacob is concerned, nothing goes without Benjamin, the son of the right hand. He served as the catalyst to reunite the family, to bring the two camps together. Even though he becomes the central character in the drama, he never says a word. Okay. And this should ring all kinds of bells in your ears. Okay. So that was a little bit about Benjamin. Why did Joseph not contact his father? For over 20 long years, Joseph had made no attempt to contact his father. Why? Once in the position of power, it would have been an easy thing to send messages to Canaan to let his father know that he was still alive and finally end his father's pain and suffering, but he doesn't. Commentators over the ages have struggled, again, there's your problem, struggled with the issue, trying to find reasonable answers. And here again, we are trying to fix a problem that the authors apparently didn't have. Last year, Rabbi Dr. Yoel Ben Nun, this is when I had this in my mailbox, from Yeshivat HaEtzion in Israel, offered a radical but psychologically astute solution. And this is what he said. Joseph never contacted his father because he believed that his father had abandoned him. According to this interpretation, Joseph had no idea that his brothers had deceived their father with his blooded coat, leading Jacob to believe he had been killed by wild animals. Instead, Joseph spent years in slavery and then in his rise to power wondering why his father, a man of means and influence, never came searching for him. According to Rabbi Ben Nun, this heart-rending, and I put this in quotes, misunderstanding, is reflected in the name Joseph. Joseph gives his firstborn son. Genesis 41:51. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. The choice of name reveals Joseph's painful acceptance that his life would be lived separately from his family, whom he believed had rejected him. This interpretation also explains Joseph's complex behavior when his brothers finally appear before him in Egypt. Rather than immediately revealing himself, he needs to understand, why did his father send him to his brothers that fateful day? Why did no one ever come looking for him? So the basic assumption is, did his father throw him under the bus by sending him to Shem, of all places, where not too long before that, Dinah had been raped, supposedly, and therefore Simeon and Levi supposedly killed all the men of Shem. So why? Why would the father send him there? To get rid of him? Maybe because of his dreams? His harsh treatment of his brothers and his insistence on bringing Benjamin to Egypt become not acts of revenge, but rather a desperate attempt to uncover the truth about his family's apparent abandonment. The moment of revelation finally comes when Judah, pleading for Benjamin's release, unknowingly tells Joseph exactly what he has yearned to hear for 22 years, that his father never rejected him at all, but rather believed him dead and had mourned him all these years. This explains Joseph's sudden emotional response in Genesis 45, verses 2 and 3. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Does my father still live? Rabbi Ben Nun's interpretation transforms our understanding of this ancient story from one of seemingly cruel, delayed revelation to a profound tale of tragic, here again, misunderstanding and ultimate reconciliation. Well, that supposed misunderstanding was perpetrated by a big, cruel lie. They knew what they were doing, okay? So, and this opinion of this suggestion of Rabbi Ben Nun is being criticized by many. They don't accept this. Okay, just to give you an idea, another problem which we have to solve. Let's go to the text. Why did Joseph not contact his father? First and foremost, the time was not right, and the brothers were not ready yet. Ultimately, Joseph's dreams had to be fulfilled. The brothers were not complete. Benjamin was missing. So he had to force Benjamin's appearance with his brothers in Egypt before him, which would be the fulfillment of Joseph's first dream, the dream of the sheaves. But Jacob was missing. Benjamin, enslaved in Egypt, would then ultimately force Jacob to leave Canaan and come down to Egypt. They all had to come down to Egypt and bow before Joseph, which would be the fulfillment of Joseph's second dream. Again, but only, that is the dream of the sun and the moon and the stars. Okay, sun and the moon, Jacob and who? Rachel. Okay, we talked about this. Rachel is dead. So they fix the problem and say the mother was Bilhah. Remember, we talked about this. Who was taking care and raising Joseph after Rachel's death, okay? They all had to go down to Egypt, and this is probably much more important, to stay to fulfill the prophecy giving way back to Abram in Genesis 15:13, okay? So this narrative is way more complex, prophetic, messianic, serious, whatever other adjective you can add, than just a profound tale of a tragic misunderstanding. Rabbi Ken Spiro says, Joseph recognized that his brother's hatred had posed a mortal danger to him, and if left untreated, an eternal danger to the Jewish people in the future. unless they recognized their mistake, felt true remorse, and changed, this hatred would resurface throughout history. He knew that he had to force his brothers to do teshuvah, repentance, which is true. Okay. Now, next. In Parshat Vayigash, we find something very important hidden in the Hebrew, namely the death and the resurrection motif. Often in the New Testament, in the Brit writers claim that Yeshua has fulfilled the scriptures. But what does it mean to fulfill the scriptures? This is not as simple as it may sound. The Gospel of Matthew, in particular, frequently emphasizes that events in Yeshua's life fulfill Tanakh prophecies. These instances highlight Matthew's intention to demonstrate that Yeshua's life and ministry were in accordance with and fulfilled the prophecies of the Tanakh. For instance, the famous ones. The idea that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, that's Micah 5:2, or that he would be born of a virgin, Isaiah 7:14, and so on. These are very obvious. But other times, fulfillment is a lot more subtle because it is not about prediction, but about pattern. And this is why we need to learn to identify patterns. This is why I always ask you, what does 3 days and 3 nights mean? What does 3 days mean? After 3 days. Okay. Especially when somebody is in the pit. So what does after 3 days mean? In his role as Israel's Messiah, Yeshua fulfills the scriptures when he, in a way, relives Israel's story through his own life. And here the story of Joseph is highly significant when it comes to the death and the resurrection motif. Early on in the narrative, before the sale, the brothers strip Joseph of his special tunic and then throw him into a pit. Genesis 37, verses 19 and 20. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, into some bore. Jewish tradition says for 3 days. In scripture, the term pit is often used as a metaphor for the grave, or Sheol, which refers to the realm of the dead. And I only given you one example here, Psalm 30, verse 3. O Yahweh, who brought my soul up from the grave, Sheol, you've kept me alive that I should not go down to the pit, bore. So this is Hebrew parallelism. Now, why is this important? Genesis 39:20. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison. And that word is Sohar, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison, in the Sohar. The word Sohar appears only 8 times in all of Torah, only in the Joseph narrative. Okay, if you don't know that, you're missing the plot. Genesis 40, verse 14 and 15. But remember me, that's Joseph speaking, when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me, make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon or the prison. Bore. And in 41:14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, bore, and he shaved, changed his clothes, and came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's prison is called Sohar. But when Joseph refers to the same place, he uses the word bore, just like the pit that they threw him into, of which he is now coming out. Okay? Genesis 37:25, next. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and hine, here we go. And there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bringing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. Okay, here again. Whenever we see they lifted their eyes and look, they see more than what they see. This is a prophetic vision. Plus, immediately afterwards, we have hine, meaning pay attention. Why is that important? What were they carrying? Okay, not to make a salad, but to prepare a body for burial. Okay, remember, Mark 16 and Luke here. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices, the same spices they have here, so that they might go and anoint him. And Luke 23:56, and they returned and prepared spices and ointments. Okay, see the point? Okay. So, this is an important part to the resurrection, death and resurrection theme, number one. Next, Genesis 45, verse 5. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourself because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. That is a very special word, very unique word, mechia. Okay? Mechia appears only 2 times here, and then in Leviticus, in the Tzaraat, in the leprosy passages. And it means reviving, preserve life, recover, and so on. And it comes from the verb chaya. What is chaya? Live, revive, restore. Okay? Genesis 45, verses 26 and 27. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, or Joseph lives on. That's what it actually says. And he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. And this is the word chaya again. Okay. Pharaoh, Egypt, provided the vehicle, the means for Jacob, Israel, to come to Joseph. Because ultimately, everybody has to come to Joseph. Something within Jacob had died when he thought he had lost his beloved son. To him, Joseph was dead. And at the moment when he realized that his son was really alive, and when he saw physical proof, the carts, his spirit is revived. There is more to the carts, but we're not going there. The Midrash, Genesis Rabbah 91:6, and again, Midrash is way, way, way late. That's Talmudic time, not biblical times, okay? When you hear Midrash, anything, you have to always remember, what is it? Is it the hen or the egg? Is this original to them, or did they come up with things past Yeshua? Okay, this is so important. Okay, teaches that during Joseph's absence, the Holy Spirit left Jacob. Since that day that Joseph was stolen, the Holy Spirit departed from Jacob, so that he saw, yet he would not see, and that he would hear, yet he would not hear. But when Jacob believed that Joseph was alive, his spirit was resurrected. Going back to Genesis 44:30 and 31. Now, therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. It says in this translation, and it's, I think in most, his life is bound up in the lad's life, but that is not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew has not the lads. It has only His life is bound up in his life. His life is bound up in his life. So whose life is bound up in whose life? The Father and the Son are one. Okay? This is an important scripture. 45, 27, 28. The spirit of Jacob, their father, revived, and we have Chaya again. Then Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Okay. Resurrection from the dead. Triat Hametim. That's the word that is used in Jewish literature, in Judaism. It is not a biblical word, so it's not found in the Tanakh, but it's the concept, and they've given the concept the name, okay? But of course, it's a word in the New Testament, okay? So we have this shadow, and here we have the real thing. So this word is, in this part of our text, has very powerful messianic implications, as well as implications towards the time of Messiah and the resurrection of the dead. The moment Jacob believes that his son is alive, his spirit revives, and he becomes Israel. These are the things that you need to pay attention to. Here we have one of the key places where we see the switch from Jacob to Israel. Finally, when Israel believes that Mashiach ben Yosef, Yeshua the Messiah, is alive, the spirit revives and the resurrection of the dead will occur. And this brings us to Romans 11, which has to be read in light of Parshat Vayigash here. Romans 11, verses 11 and 12. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, if their fall is riches for the world and their failure riches for the Gentiles or the nations, how much more their fullness? And verse 15, for if their being cast away is the reconciling of the world, what will be their acceptance be but life from the dead? And we can add some more, John 5, 28. So now the picture gets bigger. So when the Jews accept Yeshua, and now the bigger picture. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. And John 11:25, Yeshua said to her, that's the I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. Now I'm going to read you a short excerpt from Jews for Jesus on the Jewish views of the resurrection. Jewish perspectives on the key claim about Yeshua. So Orthodox thoughts on resurrection. Most Orthodox Jews could reject the resurrection of Yeshua on the basis that they do not accept the idea of a Messiah who dies and is then resurrected. However, in 1996, a curious situation developed in the Orthodox community. The Lubavitch Hasidim, Chabad, were hailing their Rebbe, the late Menachem Mendel Schneerson, as King Messiah. And this is, as far as I know, the last person they claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. But now we have, what's his name in Israel? The Yanuka, yeah, what's his name? I forget. He is very busy. So, but they learned the lesson. Remember when we talked about him a couple of years ago, and all this stuff was translated, and now everything is only accessible in Hebrew. So they've learned their lesson. But he's doing lectures each and every week, so it's all posted. Okay, so now I have an image. I guess I do. Yes. So This was plastered all over. Moshiach is here. That was in 1996. That's Nielsen, yes. I would guess that was before text and tweets, right? Was that? Were there texts, were there tweets? I have no idea. Not yet. Not yet. Okay. So let's say the 21st century equivalent would be a post on X or a text message or something like that. Yeah, okay. So all over New York, Israel, everywhere. We talked about this before. You're aware of this? Okay. Okay. He had died 2 years earlier, yet they were expecting him to rise from his grave. That's the point. Other Orthodox Jews found this notion to be an embarrassment, and rightly so. Then the membership of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is composed of around 1,000 Orthodox rabbis, passed a resolution stating, quote, "There is not and has never been a place in Judaism for the belief that Mashiach ben David will bring his Messianic mission only to experience death, burial, and resurrection before completing it." Okay. What's the wrong thing here? No, Mashiach ben David is not the one who's dying. It's Joseph. That's the wrong thing. That's the problem. That is a big problem. Okay. In response to this, noted Orthodox Rabbi Aharon Soloveitchik stated that he did not believe Menachem Schneerson to be the Messiah. He said that the idea of a Messiah who dies and is later resurrected cannot be dismissed as a belief that is outside the pale of orthodoxy because we have Joseph. We have these images from Joseph. This quote fueled the controversy even more as Lubavitch rabbis were quick to embrace his words, and non-Lubavitch rabbis were just as quick to explain how Soloveitchik's words were taken out of context. Despite this open debate among the Orthodox concerning resurrection, Yeshua remains a non-candidate for the position of Messiah. Okay. No matter which position you take, Menachem Messiah or not, it can't be Yeshua. Okay? So now we're going to read some lengthy passages. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 15, where the significance, the importance of the resurrection of Messiah is central to the faith and is presented as foundational to the gospel message. Oh, I did not? Yes, I did. Yes. Now, if Messiah is preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Messiah is not risen. And if Messiah is not risen, then our preaching is empty and your faith is also empty. So, meaning you have nothing to stand on. Yes, and we have found false witnesses of God because we have testified of God that he raised up Messiah whom he did not raise up, if in fact the dead do not rise. For if the dead do not rise, then Messiah is not risen. And if Messiah is not risen, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. Then also those who have fallen asleep in Messiah have perished. If in this life only we have hope in Messiah, we are of all men the most pitiable. But now Messiah is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since by men came death, by men also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Messiah all shall be made alive. But each one in his order, Messiah the first fruits, afterwards those who are Messiahs at his coming. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, when he puts an end to all rule, and these words are important, and all authority and all power. He must reign till he has put all enemy under his feet. And the last enemy that will be destroyed is death. Now, this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does corruption inherit incorruption. And skip down to 54. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Okay. These are the important words, which I cannot read. It's arche, it's exousia, and is it dunamis? I should look at my note. Okay, remember these names. You should know these words. Okay, anyway, next. Ephesians 1:19 through 21. And what is the exceeding greatness of his power towards us who believe, according to the work of his working of his might, which he worked in Messiah when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all heavenly places, okay, up there. Principality, arche, power, exousia, and might, dunamis, and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in that which is to come. And Ephesians 6:12. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, arche, against powers, exousia, against rulers, whatever, of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness, where in the heavenly places. Okay, so why am I giving this? First, the Corinthians passage and the Ephesians passage. These are the only two places I could find where these three words are used together in one verse. Okay, why is that important? Because these are, in the end, the defeated powers in the heavenlies, in the spiritual realm. The entities we talked about last week, the ones in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, that will ultimately have to bow the knee and publicly confess that Yeshua is the Messiah, the unique Son of God, to the glory of God. And that is accomplished to the resurrection. Problem is, we only teach here this solves the problem of sin. But it does not. It does a lot more. And that's the point. That's the ultimate game, the end game. Okay? Okay. And one more. So to go to the end of the chapter and talk about the famine. Some background information on the famine. Famine in general in the ancient Near East. Things we need to know. Okay. The NIV, that's from the Archaeological Study Bible. In the years that follow, Joseph, or Tzafnat Paneach, brought about a permanent change in the Egyptian system of land tenure because of the famine and the consequent poverty of the people. Almost all the land became the property of Pharaoh, and the previous owners became his tenants. And on page 70, same. Subsistence farming and chronic malnutrition were common. So let's stop here. We talked about subsistence farming because this is important. If we correctly understand what subsistence farming means, it also explains a whole host of other things. What is subsistence farming? Subsistence farming is you produce only, or are able to produce only just enough to survive, with little or no surplus for trade or sale. Also, we always need to remember there was no fridge. Okay? So, no ability to store anything, whatever, like meat. That comes into play in Leviticus. Okay. So, famine was a real persistent threat in the ancient Near East. Chronic malnutrition was common, which would lead, among other things, to a high infant mortality rate, which in turn explains the need for many children. There also comes in the issue of multiple wives, not for fun. Okay. It also explains why the birthday, the big thing, was not such a big thing, a big event to celebrate. But what was celebrated? The day when the child was weaned, when the child was 2 years old, 3 years old, when the child was able to exist on its own apart from the mother. That's a point to celebrate. And I told you about the birthday. The only thing to celebrate at a birth was the life of the mother, that she had survived it. Okay? That's when we were talking about birthday parties. Yes, okay. Where am I? So therefore, the prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," was the expression of the most basic of all other needs, because nobody knew about the next day. So this is what I call context. Okay? Now let's go to the text. So subsistence farming and chronic malnutrition were common in the ancient world, and many people perceived themselves at any given time as being only a step ahead of starvation. Okay. Natural causes like drought, locust, blight brought about frequent famines, as did human actions, from siege warfare to destruction of fields by invading armies, to the exacerbating of food shortages by hoarding. Usually famines in this part of the world were temporary and local, but some long-term and widespread occurrences have been recorded. So we have proof of that. Okay. So now, natural causes. Drought, locust, blights. Well, in the ancient world, where everything was run by the gods, there was no such thing as natural causes. Causes independent or unrelated to the gods. This is why there were gods responsible for all areas of existence. This is why being on good terms, for example, with the rain and storm gods and the fertility gods or goddesses was so important. Natural causes: drought, locust, blight, mildew. That's how we would perceive these disasters. But in the ancient world, they were considered curses from the gods. And that's exactly what we find in Deuteronomy 28 in the curse section. Because that is God, what God says he will do to Israel. If they serve other gods, then he will throw all these things at them. And they would know that this is not a natural cause. Okay. Now, the famine narrative, that's Genesis 47:13 through 21. That narrates how Joseph deals with the famine. And I want to point some things out, and then we're almost done. Now there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." Then Joseph said, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle of the herd, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate." Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. So every man of the Egyptians sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's, and as for the people, he moved them into the city from one end of the borders of Egypt to the next. Okay, JPS commentary. This passage describes the progressive impoverishment of the Egyptian population. And as I showed you, can you go back? We have 3 stages: their money, their livestock, and our bodies and our lands. Okay. Joseph's rescue of them through skillful administration, and finally, and most troubling, here we go again, his enslavement of them to Pharaoh. The tables have indeed turned. The man who was brought to Egypt as a slave now reduces the Egyptians to slavery, all the while, however, saving their lives just as he saved the lives of his own family. The cruelty of Joseph's enslavement of Egypt does not seem to bother the narrator. When Joseph died, however, and a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, the house of Israel found themselves once again on the wrong end of the enslavement process. And here we can clearly see that our perception of Joseph's action is interpreted into the text. The narrator apparently did not perceive Joseph's actions as cruelty. Again, see how we create problems where the text has no problem. Okay? The text itself expresses a willingness on the part of the Egyptians to sell their souls, their everything, to Joseph, because he was the only one who could keep them alive, and they confess it. "You have saved our lives." So, here again, we are dealing with a much, much, much bigger picture. One more thing. As I mentioned before, there are many things in the Joseph narrative that make the reader, not necessarily the narrator, uncomfortable, like this one. Rabbis don't like that. Joseph is often blamed for doing things he shouldn't have done. Why? Because if Joseph hadn't done X, the brothers wouldn't have done or wouldn't have had to do Y and Z. Okay. And here is one more to add to that list. Verse 27. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Grew and multiplied, that should remind you of Genesis, of course. JPS commentary. Whereas the Egyptians lose their land to Pharaoh because of Joseph's administrative policy, the Israelites acquire holdings through the generosity of Pharaoh, grateful for Joseph's managerial skills. Similarly, the fertility and increase of Israel contrasts with the devastation and impoverishment of the Egyptians. Once again, underscores the special role of the form in God's design. Okay. Okay, we need to look at this as a much, much bigger picture. First of all, it doesn't say that they experienced this as cruel, because they were taken care of, right? They were taken care of. Okay. So, I did not talk today about Messianic shadows a lot on purpose, because I want you to pick up these things by yourself, because I phrase things so you will do that. The Joseph story is multi-layered, with characters representing different aspects, not just one, different aspects of God's story of redemption. Joseph is very important because Yeshua is the bigger Joseph. So, and with all of that, you should read the Joseph cycle again. And now we're going to watch a very, very short clip. And I say amen and amen.
We can see where a smooth veneer layer of limestone had once been applied over the brick, creating a smooth surface, but most of it has since been removed. Here is where we find the statue of Pharaoh Zoser, under whom Imhotep served. It was on the base of this statue of Zoser that Imhotep was mentioned as a man, not as a god. He was first after the king, with his cartouche shown here. At the complex of buildings, the main hall is of importance to us. It was here and in other locations in Egypt that Joseph saved his country from famine. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them 7 years of famine will deplete the land." In Joseph's day, as one entered the building, they would make their way down this hallway to purchase grain. There would be many cashiers available for customers of various languages to trade for the much-needed food. The famine was all over the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. As we exit the hallway through the area in the rear, we see over on one side a series of deep structures where grain was stored underground during the 7 years of plenty. Then over the next 7 years, it was sold to the Egyptians and visitors from other countries. A system of vertical underground silos created a cooler environment for the grain to be stored. This was the design of the genius, Joseph. When grain was removed from storage, the oldest grain was carried up by way of this long descending stairway. The grain silos were interconnected via tunnels, which allowed the grain to flow down to a central exit point located at the bottom of this stairway. A record of this event of removing the grain can be seen on hieroglyphics such as this at Thebes, showing the sacks of grain being carried up the stairs from the granaries. Another example of this can be seen at the tomb of Iti. As a way to honor the Lord of heaven, Joseph built this first pyramid in Egypt at Saqqara to show his thankfulness to the Lord for honoring him and saving the Egyptian people from famine. In that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt. Centuries later, many other great pyramids were built in Egypt, following the lead of Joseph or